So I wanted to talk a little bit more about loops. This is a second lecture. I did an earlier lecture on how to use a for loop to simulate rolling a die, a six-sided die, a random number of times. And so I wanted to show you how loops are somewhat interchangeable. So I could do the for loop, or I can do a while loop to do the same thing. Now, here are a couple of differences between for and while loops. They both run until some Boolean expression becomes false and then they stop. So as long as this Boolean expression is true, the loop runs. When it becomes false, the loop stops. That's the same whether it's a for loop or a while loop. But the setup is a little bit different. Notice that when I want to use a while loop, I have to use a loop counter just like I did with the for loop. But I have to declare that counter before the while loop starts, and it's declared outside of the while loop. So the difference is I can reference, if I need to use that counter outside of the loop, I can do it. Because this variable is just a standard standalone variable, I happen to be using it as a counter variable for the loop, but it never goes away. It's not deleted like this temporary counter variable in the for loop. This is a variable that's going to hang around, and that might not be the best use of memory, but it's going to hang around even after the loop finishes running. It is declared before and outside of the while loop. So here's the while loop itself. Notice the condition. I changed the loop counter name from I to counter, but notice that the condition is basically the same for both loops. I'm going to loop as long as the value in counter is less than or equal to the random number that's determining how many times I'll roll. And notice I started this counter with 1 just like I started I with 1 up here. So I've got my counter, I've got the while loop here with the condition. When this becomes false, the loop will stop. Now here is the body of the loop, the same code that I used above. And we see it running here where I've run it once before, and it was supposed to roll the die 47 times. And then the other thing that you have to be careful of with a while loop, and I made this mistake when I first ran it, I forgot to put in a line of code similar to the line up here that makes sure the counter eventually gets to a value that's higher than how many, so the loop stops. So what I really need to do is put counter plus plus in here, or I could put counter plus equals 1, or I could put counter equals counter plus 1. These all do the same thing, okay? So if you forget this line, you get an infinite loop, and that's what happened to me. Unfortunately, I was able to press the stop button and stop it from running before it crashed the whole computer. So I have matching parts to the for loop. Here is the loop counter. Here's the loop counter for the while loop. Here's the Boolean condition that determines whether or not the loop runs and when it stops. That's right here. Here is where I'm bumping up the loop counter to make sure the Boolean condition actually becomes false at some point, so I don't have an infinite loop, and that's right there. That's usually the last line in the while loop. So a while loop can execute 0 to many times, similar to a for loop. It's a lot easier to accidentally make this while loop infinite than it is to make, you really sort of have to try to make a for loop infinite because of the way it won't even compile if you don't have this stuff set up. But it's very easy to make a while loop infinite. So be careful of that.